Hello everyone, this is Shadrach ASMR with yet another video about film discussion here. Philosophical videos about where I talk about films and hopefully give you all wonderful tingles. Hopefully without any interruptions. This video is going to deal with slasher films. Now, the one thing that really gets to me about slasher films is the fact that the police are in it. That's one thing I'm going to discuss. The ineptitude of the police. It's basically you have some kind of a lone sheriff or police officer that comes out and says, oh, there's a serial murderer, there's a slasher, and they just brush it off. Yeah, right, your imagination, blah, blah, blah. Because I can't stand that sort of thing. In real life, the police would be more, and they would be more adept at finding the cause of what's going on. And they would not just send one officer, sometimes they would send two. And it just is utterly ridiculous that the cops in these films, if not the law enforcement officials in these films, are just so blatantly idiotic. You would think that the cops would have more in these horror films, would have more understanding of what's going on. They would not just brush it off as some wild kid's imagination. They would be more adept at investigating. That just really angers me when people want to do that, when these films are just do that kind of thing, because it's unoriginal, number one, and number two, it's unrealistic. Yeah, I know it's a film, big deal. Yeah, whatever. It's a film, I know it is, but don't talk to me like I'm an idiot. This is just a discussion, a philosophical thing about it. I don't know any cops that would do that. That would try to brush off some kind of a, figment of one's imagination. Because I have actually seen police in real life investigate things. In my line of work, security officer, I've actually seen it. And I'm not going to disclose that because that's another topic for another day. Even before I became a security officer, I've actually seen cops do investigations. Before sometimes I'd ask, hey, what's going on? They said, no, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. But anyways, moving forward. That goes into number two. How the hell do you report on the deaths of this supernatural thing? You know, the final girl is going to have a lot of hard time explaining to the cops and law enforcement officials and say, yeah, some supernatural thing killed all my friends. Or some whack job from the dead slaughtered everybody. Really now? How the hell are you going to explain this? How the hell do you explain this kind of thing? The one horror film that actually did this right was Evil Dead. Or rather, one of the many incarnations of Evil Dead in the Evil Dead series is that in one of the video games, Ash is locked up in an insane asylum, and people think he's nuts. So technically, that was the one horror franchise that did something right. All the other horror films and video games and franchises and what have you, they do not touch on that. They just say, oh, final girl is happy, let's just walk away, blah, 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 blah. And really now? So, imagine being a detective, and you have this person here whose friends were killed by this supernatural entity that basically comes from the grave and slashed up all your friends. Really, you expect us to believe that? Oh, put them in the loony board, in the loony room. Put them in the loony bin. Excuse me, I meant loony bin, not loony room, and it came out. But anyways, it's just ridiculous how some people will brush that off. So on one end, you have the police basically brushing off the seriousness of this loon, but at the same time, you also have to contend with what the police are really going to say in regard to the aftermath. It's like the police are so, in these horror films, are too damned inept to do anything. And the third thing about horror films that I've noticed is that every single one of the victims, every victim in this horror film, usually does one of two things. The first victims are usually those that engage in premarital sex or drugs and alcohol. And from what I understand, the first victims are usually those that engage in premarital sex. The second victims are usually the cowardly other victims that did some drug use or alcohol use, and usually one of them, one or two of them, usually a guy, usually a girl, I don't know, that often acts cowardly and is usually the next one to go. You can always tell which one. The first two are usually those that engage in premarital sex, and then it moves on to those that did the drugs and alcohol, and then usually the guy or the girl of that pairing acts cowardly. And then it drops down to the final two. The guy heroically fights and dies, and then the girl gets away. The final girl gets away and lives to see another day. That's an interesting take on it. I've noticed that pattern over and over again, and it just, regardless if it's Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, regardless if it's been Jeepers Creepers, it's just that these horror films have the same tired formula. And the fact that they want to extend the damn franchise. Look, if you want to do a trilogy, but don't extend it to have Saw 270,000 or Nightmare on Elm Street 8,462 or Friday the 13th Part Infinity or Hellraiser 106th to the 8th power. Or what's another good example? Phantasm. Now, there ain't going to be any more Phantasm films because Angus Grimm, he bit the dust back in 2016, unfortunately. I hate to put it that way, but that's the truth. So don't expect any more Phantasm films unless it's a remake. Ugh, I can't stand remakes. And jump scares are really starting to bore me. Jump scares, you can just expect a jump scare. You can just tell a jump scare is going to happen. You watch a horror film, first time jump scare, oh God. And then by the time you watch that horror film countless times over, you know what's going to happen. You know the jump scares. Which leads me to conclude, why was a horror film like The Shining successful? I really like how Stanley Kubrick basically didn't do any of the tired old, cliches associated with horror. Yes, he had blood and he had a lot of other scary things. Basically, if anything, The Shining, I've not seen The Shining. I've seen a lot of film analyses of it by Rob Ager. Great guy, by the way, Rob Ager. Check out his channel, Collative Learning. Very educational stuff. I've seen a lot of films because of this guy, because of Rob Ager. I've been interested in, I've seen a lot of Stanley Kubrick films because of this gentleman, and he was very good. Sorry, I'm just fixing my camera. Because the overall general purpose of these videos, by the way, is not to put you to sleep, but rather to relax you. But anyways, The Shining was very good because, and there is a video I'm going to send, whether you've seen The Shining or not. I would like to watch The Shining just to say that I saw The Shining. I know enough about it. Basically, a guy goes crazy at a snowed-in hotel and tries to kill his family, blah, 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 written by Stephen King. Here's Johnny, Jack Torrance or something, whatever. Anyways, moving forward. I like it because it didn't have any sort of, meddling kids and all that other crap. Anyways. What was I saying about The Shining? Oh, yes. Rob Ager did a very interesting video about how the set designs didn't add up. Like spatial displacement or something. I think that's the exact word. I'm going to put a link below so that whoever watches this video can basically watch Rob Ager's take on The Shining. Very good film. And, just seeing how many more minutes I got on my camera. But anyways, very good films. Very good films and everything like that. Very, very good film. Very classic, because they did a remake of The Shining, and it was in the 90s, and it was crap. But the 1980 film, The Shining, was perhaps the superior one. But I'm not going to talk about remakes. That's not the purpose of this video. It's just mainly about horror. And I don't like how horror just makes an effort to just make a franchise. I don't like horror franchises because it's just the same tired, recycled plot over and over again. I can understand a trilogy. I mean, there's one horror franchise that did do it right. Evil Dead. That film franchise did it right. Because it wasn't just trying to have different continuities or different adventures with Ash. No. Instead, Evil Dead expanded on the storyline. The first Evil Dead, you have a cabin, Ash loses his friends, his sister, and then everything goes back, goes down and out. Then the second Evil Dead film, which was kind of like a semi-remake, a sort of a remake, a semi-remake of the first film, or rather retelling of the first Evil Dead, that ended, with Ash ending up not in his proper time. I'm not going to disclose that. And then you had Army of Darkness, or Evil Dead 3, that extends upon that. I got so much on my mind here. And basically then you had like the video games and the comic books and the television series about Evil Dead that just expanded on the entire storyline, that expanded on the entire tale of Ash basically fighting against the Deadites. It wasn't trying just to have different films as different continuities or totally retellings of the same story. No. It was an entire ongoing storyline. Another horror franchise that did it right was Tremors. Because Tremors, I saw the first one, I vaguely remember the second one, I saw some of the later editions, but I do like how Tremors in the first film, basically, you had these graboids under the deserts of Arizona or Utah or New Mexico causing problems in a rural area of the desert. And then the second film extended upon the first film, and how the third film was basically like a western that explained the origin story of the graboids. And then it wasn't technically, the Tremors was not necessarily, it was a franchise, but it was not necessarily just rehash, because the stories, even though the graboids were the central villain of the story, the filmmakers nonetheless made them individual stories that were part of a bigger storyline. And that's why Tremors was pretty good. That's why Tremors and Evil Dead are perhaps the best franchises in the way of horror. Because they didn't just retell the stories, they didn't just try to retell the entire storyline in every individual film. They had a huge storyline, they had a huge mythos. Now, I'm not sure about Saw. Not Saw, but Scream. Scream, I like. I've never seen Scream. But from what I understand, Scream basically turned the horror genre upside down. It turned it upside down, basically. It was pretty good. And it was, from what I understand, pretty good. But then they decided to make Scream 4, Scream 5, and it just... Ugh. I hate it when horror films make franchises like that. I really do, because it's just the same. Like I said before, horror franchises is just rehash. It's a lot of rehash, number one, and number two, it's just the same tired story. And eventually it just shows that these writers just do it for the money. Now, if I'm in a horror film, I'm going to have a lot of, requirements in my contract that state this is what I want done. But that's a total different argument. I'll probably post down what I've got down below. Anyways, what is your take on horror films? And why are horror film franchises so successful, even though we know it's the same story over and over again? Unless you're counting Evil Dead and Tremors, which were ongoing storylines. But what is your take on this? Anyways, this is Shadrach ASMR. Well, I hope you have some decent dreams. Then again, you might not because of this video. And various other things as well. Until then, tell me what you think.